Lillian had always believed that life inside a mansion would feel like paradise, but living in the Thompson estate proved her wrong. The house was wide and filled with expensive things, yet cold and empty at the same time. What made it bearable for her were two little boys, Justin and Daniel, the 7-year-old twins of James Thompson. To them, Lillian was not just a maid. She was the one who listened when they missed their late mother, the one who tucked them in when they had nightmares, the one who stayed beside them when they were sick. In the quiet corners of the mansion, they called her Mama Lily, and every time they said it, her heart softened, though her own life was far from soft. Because Lillian carried a secret. She was pregnant. The news had shaken her to her core. She still remembered the morning she fainted while sweeping the living room. At the small clinic outside the city, the nurse had smiled and told her she was carrying a child. But Lillian's heart had nearly stopped. She was unmarried, a maid in a billionaire's house. What would become of her if James Thompson discovered it? For the first month, she managed to hide it. She wore loose gowns, tied her apron tighter, and moved quickly whenever she noticed James walking near. But James never paid much attention to her. He was a man buried in business. He walked through the house like a visitor, his eyes fixed on his phone, his mind far away in meetings and deals. Still, fear lived inside Lillian. What if one day his sharp eyes caught her secret? Then one evening, James stood in the living room, his tall figure commanding silence. The twins sat stiffly at his side, too afraid to fidget. Lillian stood in the corner, her hands folded, her heart racing. "I will be away for 6 months," James announced, his voice cold and clear. "Business overseas. While I'm gone, I expect this house to run smoothly. Lillian, the boys will be under your care." Lillian's knees felt weak. 6 months? By the time he returned, her pregnancy would be impossible to hide. She forced her lips to move. "Yes, sir." The next morning, James's car rolled out of the gates. Lillian stood at the window, one hand resting on her belly. Relief and fear clashed inside her. Relief because she would no longer face his piercing stare every day. Fear because 6 months would pass quickly, and when he returned, she would be standing before him with a baby in her arms. Days turned into weeks. Lillian's belly grew slowly, then more noticeably. The twins noticed first. One afternoon, while she helped them with their homework, Justin placed his small hand on her stomach and asked, "Mama Lily, why is your tummy big?" Her throat tightened. She smiled softly. "Because God is giving me a gift." Daniel tilted his head curiously. "What kind of gift?" "One you'll see soon," she whispered. From that day on, the boys watched over her like little guards. They carried light bags for her, fetched her water, and begged her to rest whenever she looked tired. Their innocent love made her cry at night in her small room. Alone, she would press her hands on her belly and whisper to her unborn child, "I don't know what will happen when your master comes back, but I promise, I'll protect you." The months passed slowly. By the 5th month, walking grew harder. Some mornings she woke with back pains so sharp she had to sit before she could move again. Yet she never stopped working. She cooked, cleaned, and laughed with the boys, determined that when James returned, he would find his mansion in perfect order. But at night, when the house was silent, her fears grew louder. What if he fired her? What if he threw her out with nowhere to go? She had no family nearby, no savings, no home. She only had her unborn child and the love of 2 little boys who clung to her like she was their own mother. Finally, the 6 months neared their end. The mansion buzzed with preparation for James's return. The floors were polished, the gardens trimmed, and fresh flowers filled the halls. Everyone wanted the master to walk in to perfection. But perfection was far from what awaited him. On that day, Lillian felt the first sharp pain cut through her stomach. She tried to ignore it, thinking it would pass. She continued folding clothes in her room, whispering to herself, "Not now, please, not now." But the pain returned stronger, sharper. Then her water broke. She collapsed on her knees, clutching her belly.
Sweat poured down her face. "God, please help me," she whispered, her voice trembling. Justin and Daniel, hearing her cries, rushed into her small room. "Mama Lily!" Justin screamed, grabbing her hand. Daniel's eyes filled with tears as he ran to fetch towels, his small feet thudding across the floor. Through her pain, Lillian tried to comfort them. "Don't be afraid, Mama Lily is fine." But her body shook with every wave of agony. And just then, the mansion doors opened. Shoes clicked against the marble floor. James Thompson had returned from his 6-month trip. He expected to see his sons running into his arms. Instead, he heard cries echoing through the halls. He followed the sound, his brows tightening, his steps quickening. At the end of the hallway, he froze. There, on the floor, was Lillian, her face pale, her body trembling. His twin sons knelt beside her, crying, trying to help. For the first time in years, James's cold heart skipped a beat. He stood in shock, staring at the maid he had barely noticed before, now broken, desperate, and fighting for life before his eyes.
Lillian could barely breathe. Every contraction ripped through her body like a wave, leaving her weaker each time. She gripped Justin's small hand, her nails digging into his skin without meaning to. "Stay with me," she whispered, her voice broken. The boys cried helplessly. Daniel returned with towels, his hands shaking so badly that they dropped onto the floor. "I don't know what to do," he sobbed. "It's okay," Lillian forced herself to whisper through the pain. "You are already helping." But she knew inside that if no one came soon, both she and the baby could be in danger. Then she saw him. James Thompson stood in the doorway, his tall figure frozen, his sharp eyes wide for the first time she had ever seen. He had expected order, but what he found was chaos. His maid on the floor in pain, his sons crying, towels scattered everywhere. For a moment he said nothing. His face was unreadable, torn between shock and disbelief. Lillian lowered her eyes in shame. This was the moment she had feared for 6 months. The master of the house now knew her secret. "Dad!" Justin cried out, still clutching her hand. "Help Mama Lily!" Those words snapped James back into motion. He rushed forward, kneeling on the polished floor beside her. "What's happening?" His voice was sharp, but carried something different now, urgency. "The baby," Lillian whispered, tears streaming down her face. "The baby is coming." James' jaw tightened. For years he had faced business crises without flinching, but this was different. This was raw, real, human. He removed his jacket quickly and placed it beneath her head. "Stay with me," he said firmly. Then he looked at his sons. "Justin, Daniel, listen to me. Go to the living room and call the driver. Tell him to bring the doctor from St. Mary's immediately." The boys, though scared, nodded and ran off, their small feet echoing through the halls. Now it was just James and Lillian. She turned her face away, embarrassed that he was seeing her like this. "I'm sorry, sir," she whispered between sobs. "I never meant for you to find out this way." James didn't answer at first. He was too focused on the sight of her shaking body, her pale skin, and the sound of her shallow breaths. For years he had thought of her as just another worker, but now, looking at her, he saw more. A woman carrying life, fighting with every ounce of strength she had. "You're going to be fine," he said finally, his voice quieter, steadier. Another wave of pain hit her. She cried out, clutching his arm. Her grip was so strong it surprised him. He didn't pull away. Instead, he wrapped his hand around hers, holding on. For the first time, the cold billionaire and the frightened maid were bound together by something neither money nor power could control: the fight for a new life. Minutes felt like hours. James wiped the sweat from her forehead with his sleeve. Lillian's tears mixed with his touch, and though she kept apologizing, he kept telling her the same words. "Stay strong. You're not alone." The sound of footsteps returned. The twins ran in with the doctor and the driver behind them. The doctor carried his bag and knelt quickly beside Lillian, giving sharp instructions. "We don't have time to move her. The baby is coming now." James's heart pounded as he stepped back slightly, but his eyes never left her. The boys clung to his side, their faces streaked with tears. Together they watched as Lillian's cries filled the mansion. And then finally, it happened. A sharp cry pierced the air, the cry of a newborn. The doctor lifted a small baby girl, tiny but alive, her voice loud and clear. "It's a girl," the doctor announced. Lillian's chest heaved as relief washed over her. Her eyes searched for her child, her arms reaching weakly. James stepped forward, and for the first time in his life, his hands trembled. The doctor placed the baby into Lillian's arms. She held the little girl close, sobbing softly, whispering, "Lily, my little Lily." The twins peeked over her arms, their eyes wide with wonder. "She's so small," Daniel whispered. Justin smiled through his tears. "She's beautiful." James stood over them, silent. His mind was torn apart. Only hours ago he had been thinking about profits, deals, and power. Now here in his own house, he had witnessed life itself. And the woman he had barely noticed before had just filled the mansion with the sound of a newborn's cry. The doctor checked Lillian quickly, then nodded. "She is weak, but stable. She needs rest." With that, he left the room with the driver. Silence filled the space. The only sound was the soft cry of the baby girl in Lillian's arms. James finally spoke, his voice low. "You hid this from me." Lillian's eyes filled with tears again. She couldn't look at him. "I was afraid," she whispered. "I thought you would throw me out." James stared at her for a long moment. His sons looked up at him, waiting for his reaction. The old James, cold, strict, distant, would have dismissed her right then. But something inside him had shifted. He knelt down again, closer this time. His eyes softened as he looked at her and the tiny baby girl. "No," he said slowly. "I won't throw you out. I won't let you face this alone." Lillian's lips trembled. She had prepared for anger, for rejection, for shame. She never expected care. Her tears flowed freely as she clutched her baby closer. James looked at his sons, then back at her. "From now on, you're not just the maid, you're the woman who brought life into this house. And this child," his eyes settled on Lily, "she will never lack anything, not while I'm alive." The twins smiled through their tears, wrapping their small arms around Lillian. For the first time, James did not stop them. He let the scene unfold, his heart heavy, but softer than it had ever been. And deep inside, Lillian realized something she never thought possible. The cold billionaire she had feared for so long was beginning to change.
The mansion was quiet that night. The storm of screams and panic had passed, but the echo of the baby's first cry still lingered in every corner. Lillian lay in her small bed, her face pale but calm, her arms cradling the tiny girl she had just brought into the world. Beside her, Justin and Daniel refused to leave. They sat curled up at the foot of the bed, their eyes fixed on the baby. Every now and then one of them reached out a careful finger to touch her soft hand, only to pull back in awe. James stood by the window, his hands in his pockets. He had not changed out of his travel suit. The tie was loose, his shirt wrinkled, but for once he didn't care. His eyes kept drifting back to the scene, the maid he had once overlooked, now holding a child, and his sons gathered around her like flowers drawn to the sun. Lillian broke the silence first. Her voice was weak but steady. "Thank you, sir, for not turning away." James turned, his eyes meeting hers. "Stop calling me sir, Lillian," he said softly. It was the first time he had ever spoken her name with such weight. Her lips trembled. She had always bowed to him, always hidden her feelings behind respect and fear. Hearing her name from his lips felt strange, almost unreal. He walked closer, his tall figure casting a shadow over her bed. His sons looked up at him nervously, afraid he might send her away. Instead, he crouched down so he was level with them. "Justin, Daniel, from now on, this little girl is part of this family. Do you understand?" The boys nodded quickly, their eyes shining. Lillian stared at him in disbelief. "But she is not..." She is a child, James interrupted gently. An innocent life, that is all that matters. Her tears returned, but this time they were different. They were tears of relief. For months, she had prepared herself for rejection, for the sight of her baby being unwanted. Yet here was James, the man she had feared most, declaring the opposite. He leaned closer, his voice steady. "Lillian, I pledge this before you and my sons. Your daughter, Lily, will never suffer. I will provide for her education, her health, her home, until the day she turns 18. Whatever she needs, I will give. She will not grow up in fear or in lack." Lillian gasped softly, clutching her baby tighter. The weight of his words was almost too much for her tired heart to carry. Why would you do this for me?" James' eyes softened, his sharp edges fading. "Because tonight, I saw something I've never seen before. I saw courage. I saw you fighting for life, alone, without complaint. And I realized something." He paused, glancing at the sleeping Lily. "All my wealth means nothing if I can't protect the people who bring love into this house." Justin crawled closer, tugging at his father's sleeve. "Daddy, Mama Lily takes care of us better than anyone. Can she stay forever?" The question pierced his chest. He had always been distant, hiding behind walls of money and authority, but looking into his son's hopeful eyes and at the woman who had risked everything, he knew his life was about to change. "Yes," he said firmly, "she stays." The twins cheered quietly, wrapping their arms around Lillian, careful not to hurt the baby. Lillian closed her eyes, overwhelmed. For so long, she had lived with fear pressing down on her like a stone. Now, for the first time, she felt it lift. Later that night, after the boys finally fell asleep at her side, Lillian found herself alone with James. The baby rested on her chest, her tiny breath steady. James remained by the window, silent. Finally, he spoke. "I was blind, Lillian. I thought money was enough. But while I was away chasing wealth, you were here giving my children what I never could. Love. They call you Mama Lily, don't they?" Her cheeks burned, and she looked down. "Only when no one is around," she admitted quietly. He smiled faintly. "They weren't wrong." Her heart skipped. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. She had always seen him as untouchable, unreachable. But tonight, he felt human, a man, not just a billionaire. "Rest," he said gently, noticing her heavy eyelids. "You've done enough. Tomorrow, the world may ask questions, but tonight, you and Lily are safe." As the hours passed, Lillian drifted into sleep, comforted by the sound of her baby's breaths and the strange new warmth that filled the mansion. The next morning, sunlight poured through the tall windows. The twins woke first, rushing to greet their little sister with giggles. James sat nearby, watching them play. Lillian stirred awake, blinking against the light. For a moment she wondered if it had all been a dream, James's promise, his kindness. But then she saw him sitting there, his gaze steady, his presence calm. "Good morning," he said simply. She whispered back, "Good morning." And in that simple exchange, Lillian realized her life had changed forever. She was still a maid, yes, but no longer just a maid. She was a mother, and now she was part of something bigger than she had dared to hope for. Her secret was exposed, but instead of ruin, it had brought her a new beginning. The story of Lillian, the maid who feared the truth, had turned into the story of Lillian, the woman who carried love into a billionaire's home. And as little Lily cooed softly in her arms, Lillian knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she would never face them alone again.